My guest today is Rabbi Daniel Liben, the spiritual leader of Temple Israel of Natick, Massachusetts. I spoke with him on the first day of his retirement after serving that congregation for 30 years. This is episode 20, recorded on July 6th, 2021. In addition to being a pulpit rabbi for many years, Dan taught meditation to rabbis at the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. He also teaches Israeli folk dancing. Dan introduced the exploration of prayer as a spiritual practice, and it is a cornerstone of his rabbinic work. Dan and I met over 40 years ago, and I was very excited to speak with him and learn from his years of wisdom. It's Not What You Think podcast is available on YouTube and Spotify, so please like, comment, share, or subscribe on your favorite platform. That support is enough to continue to allow us to produce this show. Our interviews are with people who may have opinions different from yours or mine, so while we keep an open mind, just remember, it's not what you think. So thanks for being on the podcast. I'm excited that you're here, Rabbi Dan Liben. And just as a reminder, I will do an intro after we do the podcast. So everyone at this point listening knows who you are. So you don't have to worry about that. So how was your week and your weekend, your July 4th weekend?
Well, my wife is making fun of me because I worked half the weekend, even though I retired the day before the weekend started.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, no. I was running Shabbat services. Our Chazan is on vacation, and on Sunday I had a wedding. And so I'm kind of easing into this retirement thing bit by bit. Yeah.
Easing or ignoring?
No, I'm really trying to ease into it. I'm really very excited about all the things I no longer have to do, but I did find that as much as I thought I was ready for this, the last month or so, last few weeks before the end date came, I was much more clingy than I thought I would be. It's really hard to let go of work that you've done for 30 years, even though you planned on doing it.
Yeah. I mean, it's such an ingrained part of our sense of self, our identity. And I'm the rabbi. I'm the rabbi of this congregation. I'm this person they go to. I do, this is what I do. This is who I am, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, you're not.
Yeah, so it's great practice, and it's just wonderful practice. Seeing how you can make room for other people to do the things that you want to continue doing, and just watching that unfold is really very good practice.
Absolutely. It's learning to let go and learning not to grasp so hard to some things. So that's great. Wonderful. So we've already started, but we're going to start again. So start at the beginning. So the Judaism you practice is conservative Judaism. Can you describe what that means to you?
Sure. Well, for me, conservative Judaism is a Judaism that has a strong respect for halakha, for traditional Jewish law, but at the same time understands that halakha is a historical phenomenon. It's something that happens within history, not outside of history, and therefore it needs to constantly be changing, as does any legal system that wants to remain relevant. So that's kind of the position, that centrist position that conservative Judaism takes within the broad spectrum of Jewish religion in America.
Beautiful. Thank you. So just so you know, a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed, I think someone you know, of course you do, Rabbi Ruth Sohn.
Absolutely,
And I
yes.
asked her the same question about Reform Judaism, and the answer was pretty much the same.
That's great. I love that.
I probably should edit that part out of the podcast. I don't want to confuse people. So do you remember the first time you started going down a spiritual path, or knew when you wanted to be a rabbi?
I don't think those are different kinds of questions, but I'll
Okay.
start from the beginning and kind of lead up to where it became more clearly a spiritual path. When I was in college, I went to Bryn Mawr and Haverford colleges. I was a student at Haverford College, but I majored in the history of religion department at Bryn Mawr. And while I was there, I switched from having thought I was going to become a journalist or something in the English language field, to realizing that I really wanted to do something in the Jewish community. I loved teaching. I loved working with people. And that's where I thought I was going to go. At least I got to that point at a certain point, but certainly wasn't going to be the rabbinate, because that meant having to deal with all kinds of God issues that I just didn't know what to do with that stage of my life at all,
That always
at all.
that always gets in the way. All those
Totally
God
got in the
issues.
way. Those God issues totally got in the way. And and I had a professor, though, at Bryn Mawr, who had been a former congregational conservative rabbi. And he said, the truth is that if you want to work in the Jewish community, you should go to rabbinical school and you should go to the Jewish Theological Seminary, for a practical reason that if you want to work in the Jewish community, having the title of rabbi will stand you in good stead. And beyond that, going to rabbinical school is the place where you could get a good grounding in traditional Jewish texts, which I didn't have. And I thought, that's great. And that all made sense. I still was really hung up on this God issue. And I almost didn't go to JTS. Having been in school on the Philadelphia Main Line, I was very familiar and interested in the Reconstructionist
Of
rabbinical
course.
columns. And that would have been a very good fit for me ideologically. And I decided that it would be a mistake, that I needed to go to the other one, JTS, where I would be pushed beyond my comfort zone on matters of Jewish practice, as well as theology. And I felt that I needed to be pushed, and that's where I would go, to the place where, in some sense, it was my home. I was raised as a conservative Jew, but in another sense, going to the rabbinical school is very different from being a layperson in the community. So I went, jumped into it, and only after having been there a year did I realize that, gee, being a congregational rabbi, this would be a really good fit for me. This would be a great way to do the kind of work I like to do, working with people, working with families, helping people get excited about Jewish life, Jewish practice, Jewish life cycle events. So, and I thought I would handle the God piece by throwing myself into theology and learning everything that everyone has to say about God. And so, for a long time, I just loved those Jewish theologians, and the theology classes were really big in my life. At a certain point, years later, working as a rabbi, um, things really opened up for me in a completely different way, and the God piece began to change for me, and the spirituality piece began to change for me. And what happened was I received an invitation to register for a 3-day meditation retreat for rabbis.
Wow.
That
What year was that?
This was, I think maybe it was 1999.
So it's still pretty early in the meditation world.
Yeah, yeah. But at this point, this was coming from a place at Eilat Chaim, a Jewish retreat center that Rabbi Jeff Roth and his wife founded. And the Cummings Foundation was paying for these 3-day retreats to bring rabbis and cantors into this world, and just to expose them to mindfulness.
But you'd been a rabbi at that point, I would think, by 99, correct?
Oh my
Like
goodness, for
7 to 8
years.
years. Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was out in the field for years, and at least a dozen years by the time I went to Eilat Chaim. And but I wasn't sure where I was going, but I felt called. I had a feeling that this was going to speak to me in some kind of a profound way, and I wasn't exactly sure how, but I needed to go. So I went. Sylvia Borstein was one of the teachers, along with Jeff Roth, um, along with Sheila Weinberg, who really became one of my mentors, and to this day is my mentor, and close friend. And it just, even though it was only a 3.5-day retreat, it really changed everything for me. I didn't know where to go with it next, but I tried very hard in those following months and a year to hold on to the rudiments of a mindfulness practice that they began to teach us, and just completely doing this on my own. So finally, I was able to enroll in a 2-year mindfulness training program at Eilat Chaim with Jeff Roth and a bunch of other colleagues who were, actually, it was Jeff and Sheila Weinberg who were doing this work the most at this time.
So the first 10, 12 years of being a rabbi, you were, I will call it, very traditional in that regard, because meditation was even though it's been around thousands and thousands of years, from a Judaic perspective. I'm sure there are people that would maintain that meditation has been around there for thousands of years as well,
Absolutely.
for sure. But as far as the more popularized version, you call it mindfulness, that is relatively new in the West. So you got kind of pulled to that, which is I find interesting. But I also find interesting this concept of God. You know, it's not something that I think gets taught. Okay, today's lesson class we're gonna teach you about God. Um, and in some ways, actually, I take that back because I went to Orthodox yeshiva, and in some ways, that's kind of what they were doing. And I had some issues, which I'm not going to get into in this podcast. We can about my education there, but that way for me did not work. My sense of God has developed and continues to develop. Even though I'm a Buddhist for 40 years, we don't use the word God. We use God with a small g, but we have the sense of, as does I think everyone, that there's something out there bigger than us. And everyone that I've interviewed on the podcast, which includes rabbis, imam, Hindu, Buddhists, we're all using kind of the same sense, we just have different words for it. And of course, different approaches. So I find that to be very interesting. The other thing is when I grew up, I wanted to be a rabbi. And my parents dissuaded me. They said, bad idea. And my father, of course, still is a rabbi for, pulpit rabbi also for 50 plus or so years. So, so that's why I'm interviewing you guys. I'm living vicariously through your experience. So how is Jewish meditation different from secular meditation, if there is a difference?
I'm not sure there is much of a difference. I think what Jewish meditation as a corpus out there right now is an integration. It is opening up the Jewish texts and allowing people to see meditation through a Jewish lens and to see authentic Jewish sources for meditation, specifically through Neo-Hasidic texts. And I would say that now I'm speaking from in my wearing my hat as somebody who, after Eilat Chaim in those years, got very involved with something called the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. And what IJS does is one of the many things they do is the original focus about 20 years ago was on bringing mindfulness techniques to rabbis and cantors so that we would be better leaders in our communities and better equipped in this complicated world to do the work that we're called upon to do in communities. Going to IJS was a game changer for me. For me, all these years later, it's the gift that keeps on giving. And I think the biggest gift that it gave me was that it helped me to see that a prayer life was a practice, or could be a spiritual practice, in the same way that my sitting practice was a practice, or in the same way that a yoga practice is a practice. And it's kind of funny to say that I've been a rabbi for nearly 20 years before I realized the depths of what a prayer practice could be. But the truth is, I don't really think I had a prayer practice until I went to IJS and began to see this in a different way,
So,
and to make it a practice.
Perfect. And I was going, I have 22 pages of notes here. We're on the third line of page 1. So I want to talk about that practice. But before I do, what occurred to me based on no knowledge at all, I like to make all of my decisions without paying attention to the facts, is that there was a realization that that there's a demand in the country amongst Jews for meditation. And where are they getting it? They're getting it from Buddhists. They're getting it in yoga classes. Well, guess what? They should be getting it, or could be getting it, from the synagogue, from our Jewish leaders. We need to fill that void, or we're going to lose these people. That's what I'm guessing happened. That's what it feels like to me. But do you have a sense of that?
Well, I think that's only partly true, Morty, because I don't think that, for example, the motive of the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, or for the many rabbis and cantors who've been trained there, was quite as narrow as we need to save those Jews from we need to provide the spirituality that they could get in Buddhism, and therefore we need to save them. And it was really a lot, I think, a lot less urgent and narrow, I think, than that sounds to me. Because to me, I think what really happened was, for us, first of all, a realization that this kind of practice gave us the tools to be more deeply feeling human beings, and therefore to be able to do the work that we want to do in our communities better. And that it was more like a great unfolding of being able to open up for our communities the riches of Jewish tradition that are there. So, and in the process, we hope that would keep some people in who might
Sure.
consider going out. But
So
that was
clearly,
really it. It was about opening the whole thing up for all of us. And like, I don't have a lot of Bujus in my community, so I couldn't worry about saving them. They weren't my people.
right.
I was considered my concern became, how can I save these people who think they're great traditional Jews but have no spiritual life? You know,
Beautiful. So there was a recognition of the value behind a mindfulness training from a Jewish perspective for the community. Very, very simply, which is wonderful. I
yes, I
think.
think it's absolutely
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So along those lines, you created a mindfulness service guide, which is kind of what the direction you were going in a few moments ago, to encourage congregants to develop Jewish prayer as a spiritual practice,
Yes.
supported by meditation, chanting, that kind of thing.
Right.
When I'd read that, what occurred to me was, when I grew up, mostly others, but I was part of the group, were, saying our Jewish prayers morning and one in the afternoon, one in the evening. And that to me seemed like, even wasn't really for me personally, but to those around me, that was their spiritual practice. So, I'm just wondering, why was this a new thing, this mindfulness service guide, to develop Jewish prayer as a spiritual practice? I would have assumed it was already there. So what does that mean, Jewish prayer as a spiritual practice, as opposed to just the Jewish prayer that we had before mindfulness came around?
Okay. I think there are a couple of answers to that. And the first is that, um, for many Jews, they weren't taking on the kind of rigorous commitment to prayer that you described from your childhood. So they weren't experiencing the even the effect of a periodic um, structure container of a mantra that prayer could be. They weren't even experiencing that. What they were experiencing was an occasional drop in, if you're lucky, maybe once every Saturday, and maybe one or two minyan mornings, or not ever, um, a drop into a service that was hard to follow in a foreign language, totally didn't seem to be at all relevant to their lived experience. Um, and so the whole thing needs to, and I had, by this time, of course, as a rabbi, grown to love this service, but at the same time, I was still stuck in the mode that I had been in since childhood, which is that this is something you do because as a good Jew, you do it. It's a commandment. But no one ever said to me, it's a commandment because practices need structure. And so what the rabbis have given us is actually a wonderful practice container, if you see it as such. And that was totally mind opening for me, to be able to approach the same words and the same rubric and structure, but to come from a different angle. I'm not doing this because God says you got to do it, or the tradition says you got to do it. I'm doing this because this is a tool for practice that can help me be a more compassionate person in the world, and a more connected
Now,
person in the world,
so
and that you can set goals for your prayer practice. No one, no one at JTS ever said you can posit and create goals for your prayer practice. No one even would even use the word prayer practice.
So I'm going to ask you about goals in a moment. So to me, I think it's brilliant because you're right. The communities that I grew up in primarily, yeah, they'd show up on a Friday night or a Saturday or a bar mitzvah or a wedding or whatever, and that was the extent pretty much of their Jewish life. Maybe they kept kosher style, maybe they didn't. Maybe there was some cultural Jewish stuff going on, but that was really much more vague. Um, so what this, I guess IJS did, or the mindfulness service guide was say, hey, we're going to create a practice of this, a regular practice where you can get the following. It's almost like a marketing thing in some sense. It's kind of a repackaging of what we have because people don't recognize the value to them.
Absolutely, but it's not only the marketing and the repackaging. It really is the reinventing and reinvesting the practice with the potential that most people never perceived. And that's really, I think that's one of the great challenges that rabbis have in the United States today. And I used to say that liberal, but it's not liberal. It's all rabbis. I've been in Orthodox communities where I walk in and I sit down like, what is going on here? I mean, this person's reading a book, this person's reading a magazine article, and they're just, waiting for the Torah service. But, no one thinks that the prayer part is important.
Right.
It's important to be halachically there and to fulfill one's obligation by saying amen, but the practice itself is not being practiced. So I'm not saying that of everybody, but
I get
but
it.
I've seen that across the board in every denomination. What I see in my own denomination sometimes when I go on vacation, I love a busman's holiday. I love going to other places so I can daven in their synagogues on Saturday morning and see what it's like and see what they do with the early morning service, which is my favorite part, the part that no one's there for.
Right.
And who are the people who are there, and what are they getting out of it, and how are the clergy crafting it, and is this maybe something I can learn from that? And I love that. But sometimes I go to other congregations, and honestly, Marty, it's like the emperor's new clothes. You sit in a congregation, and there's somebody at the front of the room doing something, and other people sitting there doing nothing, quietly and very well behaved, and waiting for the page to turn. And it's like, I think to myself, what do they think is happening in this space? And to me, that's the great tragedy of the spiritual life of a great swath of people in America. And I think particularly within the American Jewish community. And my theory about that is that I think Abraham Heschel back in the 50s and 60s really had his finger on this. He was really worried about the spiritual life of the American synagogue, the suburban synagogue, and the reason I think we're in such a crisis is partly because we are still suffering as a community a PTSD effect of the Holocaust. I think after the Holocaust, the early 50s, no one wanted to talk about God. It was just too painful. And I think it's taken us decades to come out of that, and we're still not completely out of it. On top of the fact that it was mid-century, the United States of America, the most secular time in the most secular country in the world. So, and this was the time when the American conservative and reform movements were growing like topsy. Synagogues were being built on every street corner in those years, in every suburban street corner. And so you put all of those factors together, and you have this wonderful communal structure that offers a lot, but at its core had a very weak sense of spirituality.
Yeah, I think I interviewed, I don't know if you know him, Rabbi Adam Kligfeld from Los Angeles. So he quoted, I'm pretty sure he quoted Heschel about that issue, something to the effect that, he's talking to the rabbis and said, hey, sarcastically, good job. We've managed to suck out all the spirituality from what we've been doing. I think talking about conservative Judaism. So this is in direct response to that kind of comment, which is to engage, enliven, excite people, Jews, to realize the tremendous value for them as individuals and of course as a community. Now that I understand it better, I'm excited by it, even though I think this has been going on for some time.
Mm.
You mentioned the setting goals, and I'm curious what that is because for me, I don't like the word goals. I do my best not to use it, even though I use it every single podcast. But so, what kind of goals are we talking about here?
This is an idea I think I heard first and learned from Rabbi Eben Leder, who uh, teaches tefillah and among many, many other things at Hebrew College in Boston. And I had the privilege of sitting on a couple of retreats through the Institute for Jewish Spirituality that Eben led. And Eben posited that we should actually think about what our goal for a particular tefillah period might be, rather than just like unthinkingly go into it, but to think about. So for me, the way I understood that for myself is I always have my basic goal. My basic goal before sitting down to prayer is how can I use this next half hour or 2 hours, whatever it's going to be, to open my heart? How can I be more in touch with what I need to hear and what I need to feel so that I can be a more compassionate person? And I suggest that as a goal all the time in public prayer before we go into a silent period of prayer. To use different techniques. I suggest to people here are different techniques you may want to use during this silent period to be in to serve that goal of how can I be a more grateful person? It may be that when I sit down to pray, I may be in a state of mind where I think I need to be more grateful and allow gratefulness to be what pulls me through this particular prayer session. So I think it's important to ask people to think about what they're doing before they begin to do it. I mean, it's not so different than when I sit down to meditate and set an intention. Is
That's
my
what I
intention
yeah.
going, you know,
That's what I was going to ask. Was it sounds to me like you're asking people to set an intention, but using the word goal, which is fine. The reason I am so resistant to the word goal is sometimes, oh, I met my goal, I succeeded. I didn't met my goal, I
right?
failed. And I try to get away from that because
Yeah,
I'd rather be motivated by, instead of by goals, motivated by process orientation, which is
right,
let's just be curious about what we're doing now in the
right.
present moment. And then, yeah, I want to get to the top of the mountain. Don't get me wrong. But sometimes we get so held on to our goals. So setting an intention, which I think the way you described it is very beautiful and I think helps. It really helps people get into the mode in their state of mind. Otherwise, you're back in the world of rote or back in the world of, just let's read these words and is it time to go to work yet? So I'm glad you clarified that for me. Um,
I just want to say one thing about it. Like, my practice has become very different than it might have been at one time. And I'm always very frustrated by people who will read the words so quickly that I know they're not really reading them. And I'm thinking, but I'm trying to, part of my practice, actually, part of the technique of my practice has to do very often with the articulation of each word, which makes it slower to get through. Um, but at the same time, I know that for some of those people, what they're doing is their practice. And it may be, to me, very frustrating because they're not articulating. It may be very frustrating because they're just on autopilot or mumbling or something. But what they're doing for them is a fixed form that they may find very rooting, very connective, very opening. And so I try really hard. I've tried very hard over these last 15 years of this kind of work to just quiet that judgy voice in my mind when I get,
Yeah, I don't know
you
what you're talking about, so you'll have a judgy voice in your mind. Gee, I've never heard
know.
that before. You know, it's interesting because you're helping me. So this is really a gift in how to think about certain things. Because I have the same issue. You know, when from a Jewish perspective, you would see people davening, praying, and boy, would they, you know, they'd get that, they can say the Amidah or whatever real fast, and then, you know, last, you know, like I said, 40 years or so, in Buddhism, we say mantras. And of course, in Judaism, in all religions, there's mantras or phrases that we use that has a sound, that has a meaning, that can also help us uplift and transcend. And a lot of people say the mantra, let's say, Om Mani Padme Om, the Om Mani Padme Om, Om Mani Padme Om, Om Mani Padme Om. And you see these old people, 80, 70, 80, 90 years old throughout Tibet and China, and they're with their prayer wheel. Om Mani Padme Om, Om Mani Padme Om. It's like, okay, well, but then I notice when I do it that way, you know, the clock's gone. I've said my whatever 108, 216, but I didn't get much out of it. So I experiment with say it slower. Maybe you're not going to say as many. I hope no one notices I'm not saying as many as I should be saying. I'm going to have to edit that part out of the podcast. But you get a feeling out of it or a meaning. And I'm not saying people that say it fast are not getting it. And maybe one day I'll say it fast again. But it's just interesting. So I don't know the answer. But there is one other concept that I bring into play, which is the concept of kavanah, which is something that my teachers always tried to, but I didn't really know what it meant. I know what it looked like when you see it means, how would you define kavanah in English? Strong intention,
I think strong
devotion,
intention.
or
Yeah.
devotion, right? And of course, you see people that are, you know, oh, they seem very devoted. Well, how do you teach that? I don't know how to teach that.
Yeah.
Other than it, to me, it feels like it just takes time to absorb and feel that over time. But, you know, and I think it's all related. The sense of devotion, should I say it fast? Should I say it slow? If I say it fast, I don't really know what I'm saying. If I say it slow, well, I'm not meaning, you know, it's a little not clear to me, but maybe it's not meant to be clear.
So Rebbe Nachman of Bratslav has a very, very beautiful teaching, which I think in part addresses this polarity between intention and a concentration practice, which is different than looking at each word with intention. And so he has this beautiful piece. It's a very long piece, but in the quick summary is, he says, the Amidah is like walking through a beautiful field of wildflowers, and each letter is a flower, and you pick up several letters to make a word, and then you pick up more words to make a sentence and a phrase, and before you know it, you have a bouquet, and it's beautiful, but you don't want to leave them where they are. You don't want to forget them as you go on to the next word and the next phrase and the next sentence. Of course, the Amidah is pages and pages long. So he's suggesting, and he says, so you hold on to them till the end. So this is a practice I'm certainly not capable of, because what he's suggesting is both a focus on the uniqueness of the word and the beauty that it's evoking, and a concentration practice that's so deep that you carry from the first word to the last, all those pages later, without distraction. That's an impossible practice for me. I will never reach that level, but I love the idea. I think it's just so beautiful. It's not my practice. My concentration will never be that strong. But wow. And maybe for some of those people who are maybe for some of them, that's their way into a concentration practice that's really profound. And maybe that's all that needs to be, that at the end of that, 12 minutes of intense concentration practice, maybe they just feel more connected, more heart opened. I don't know. I can't judge. I don't know.
We can decide right now how they're feeling. You and I. We don't.
Like you, Morty.
I got all the answers. They're all wrong answers, but I got them.
Right.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And I don't think, we're, as an American, as a competitor, as someone who is taught that, you want to win and you don't want to lose, uh, things should be black and white. And that's not what this practice is about. This practice is about getting in touch with something greater than us, bigger than us, maybe even surrendering to it. And there's different ways to get there, depending on the person, depending on the moment in their lives, probably as well.
Absolutely. Amen, brother.
So that's my production team in the background. I don't know if you can hear them or not.
Little bit.
Little bit. Okay, good. Yeah. They wait until I'm recording to give me their feedback. It's okay. They're going to stop in about 20 hours. So, okay. So I'm going to change gears a little bit. So you and several congregants gathered outside a Wendy's restaurant about 3 years ago.
Oh, goodness, yes.
To urge them to participate in it. Remember the part of the pre-interview where I said, hey, if there's something you don't want to talk about, I'm joking. I know it's not a problem. But you want to urge them to participate in a program that ensures that farm workers are treated humanely. And frankly, before I even approach someone to ask them if they wanted to be on the podcast, I do some bit of research. And I said, do I really want to interview another congregational rabbi? Probably not, because I'd already interviewed several. But then I saw that article, and that I said, okay, I got to talk to. And then, of course, I learned that you and I have a connection that goes back 2,000 years, to 1979. But anyways, so you're outside a restaurant, Wendy's restaurant. It looked like wintertime because you guys are wearing your winter coats. Mm-hmm. I know what wintertime is like in New England. To get Wendy's to try to treat farm workers more humanely, make sure they have breaks, not abused. Horrible situation. I'm sure it still is. So how did that opportunity come to your attention? What motivated you to do that versus, I'll send them an email telling them I'm outraged, or I'm going to send $25 into that. I mean, nothing wrong with both of those things, but you and some people stood out there with signs. What was going on?
There are a couple of dear friends I have in the community, other rabbis who have been very connected for many years with Truah, which is the Jewish Voice for Social Justice. It's a Jewish social justice rabbinic movement. And one of the pet projects that Truah took on was the role of the Immokalee in Florida, because
the Immokalee. Who are they?
Okay, well, Immokalee is actually both the name of the Indians who are indigenous to the area, but it's also an area. It's also the epicenter of the tomato growing industry in Florida.
Right, exactly.
And I can't remember the name of the organization now, but there's an organization that was founded for the to strengthen workers' rights in the tomato industry.
Right.
And this is a cause that Truah has taken on. And so they, for several years, would take rabbis down on a fact-finding mission to Immokalee to meet the growers who are out in the field. And what was so fascinating is that this is not just about unionizing workers. This is about an amazing situation where the workers and the growers actually developed a standard of practice for the industry, and have invited other growers to sign on, and to invite the big players in the industry, basically the big restaurants and supermarket chains that buy these tomatoes, to sign on. And an incredible number of them have. And it's an amazing example of workers and owners working together. And what was so exciting about it was that this was so grassroots, and that the workers who started this and told us their stories, they took us around the town and to the different places where the main events of the story as it unfolded happened, about how the organization got started and where their first protest was, and the first time they had a meeting with the growers and this and that. And as they took us to each stop, there was nothing to see there, but for them in their mind, this was like history. It was like walking with the Israelites in Egypt and being told by them their story of how they got across the Red Sea. And it was very inspiring. So, and the truth is, all of this does have to do with the practice. This is not at all disconnected, because until I started doing this kind of work for myself, I never considered social justice causes as things that were interesting or important to me. I always knew they were important, but I always thought, well, there are different kinds of rabbis who will take on different kinds of issues. And I'm just not really particularly a social justice rabbi.
Right.
And that's okay, because there are other people who are, and I value and love them for that. But after beginning this kind of spiritual work on, that we've been discussing, it became more and more clear to me that these are differentiations. These are distinctions that have no distinctions, and that those walls in my own mind needed to begin to break down. And so I felt called to call up my friends at Trua and say, I want to go on the next trip. I want to learn more about this. And so that's what led me to that. I think it was a cold March day at Wendy's, because we got the call from Trua and said, our allies need you out there. So I said, of course, tell me where to go.
So you were there with, as I recall, and I could be wrong, I think you were there with a cantor. I think you were there with the president of the congregation as well. Is that possible? Am I remembering?
I don't remember.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember who came out with us. It wasn't a lot of people. It was a small group. But that didn't matter.
Right. No, for sure.
Yeah.
So what was the response, if any, from them or from congregants or from people that were walking in and out, or just general response?
The response from the people in Wendy's was stiff. I won't say hostile, but stiff. They took our pledge, our statement, or whatever as we wanted to sign. I spoke to whoever was the highest level who was working at Wendy's that day, and the point was simply to let people in the store know that this is an issue that they should be aware of. That other chains have already signed on to this, and it's really fair. I think it was costing growers an extra penny a tomato in order to support the system of checks and balances and innovations in workers' rights. It was not costing them a lot. And there was no reason for Wendy's to do it. And to this day, I feel like it's really just a basic intransigence that I don't understand. I can't really fathom why a couple of holdout chains, including Wendy's, won't go there when others have, when it really makes for a better world at not much of a cost either. So I felt, we felt like it was, sometimes it's important to make a statement even if the whole world isn't listening.
Oh, for sure.
And that's fine. And I hoped that it was also a message to the congregants at Temple Israel of Natick that this was important. This should be important to us as much as I'm always hawking them about mindfulness and spirituality, that this is a piece of that. It's really all connected. And I didn't get any pushback at it all. I got pushback about other things from them in this long journey of mine, but not about the occasion of social justice. Right. Like that they can understand, they can buy into, even if most of them themselves are not walking that path.
Yeah, sure. I remember in the 60s, my father spoke out against the Vietnam War from the pulpit, and in Brooklyn, and he got a lot of flack for that. So obviously different situation, but sometimes you get up there and say stuff and do stuff that I think in retrospect, we'd all look back and go, oh yeah, good job. But at the time, people have a different opinion. So, and as a pulpit rabbi, and I think that was one of the many reasons they didn't want me to become rabbis. As a pulpit rabbi, you have hundreds of bosses potentially. It's a tough balance. So And it's just a little bit reminiscent now of, during the last year and a quarter, year and a half of the COVID pandemic, a lot of the workers who picked crops, they were, guess what? They were essential workers.
Yeah,
So we can eat food on our plates. Oh,
yeah,
excuse me. And and now, of course, in many cases, they're being mistreated again. They're not given access to the vaccine. Many of them are undocumented. It's okay to be undocumented when you're putting food on my plate. It's not okay for you to be undocumented when, you know, when it's time for me to do something for you. So I don't want to get into too deep into that, but I just, juxtaposition of that in today's day and age. Okay, changing gears. So I listened to your conversation with your brother Michael on the podcast Bereaved But Still Me. Very moving, very inspiring. And in short, your niece, I believe, right? His
yes.
beautiful daughter passed away at 13 and a half after a life of many surgeries and difficulties at the age of 13 and a half. I want to make sure that I get that across. And you discussed with your brother lots of things, but how different people have different types of faith, especially during times of need or crisis. You know, while his family and daughter were going through this difficult situation, many people were saying, "Oh, we have faith that will be okay. God will intervene. We're going to bring her back. We're going to pray to get this done." Um, and his view was, I have faith in a different way, that it will be what it will be. Things tend to work out the way they should, even if I don't like it. And among many words of wisdom, you said, at the time of crisis, who am I to judge the quality of another person's faith? So I don't have a question. I just wanted to put that out there and see if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think Mike was expressing um, a kind of faith that was different from mine, and or talking about a kind of faith that was different from mine. And I wanted to acknowledge that although mine was different, um, that doesn't mean it's superior. It's just different. So whereas some people might feel that faith means that whatever needs to unfold will unfold, and it's good, or it's the way it's supposed to be. Um, I think what I was trying to say to Mike was that for me, bitachon, one of the words for faith, is faith that whatever unfolds, whether it's desirable or not, that I can be with it. And that for me, that was an important kind of a faith, and it might be just be enough that I have enough. Um, I'm certain enough that I can remain connected to the universe, connected to God in whatever way we want to define God, connected to my being, that I could survive, that I have faith that I could survive whatever it is as it unfolds, even if it's something that I really don't want to
Right. And I concur wholeheartedly. I shouldn't say wholeheartedly. But what occurred to me as I was listening to that podcast, I had to listen to it several times because I wanted to get the quotes correct,
happen.
is that, and I also want to present it from a Buddhist perspective, but some people can't. It's so devastating. I interviewed a woman for this podcast a few months ago whose son committed suicide. And she said, "Look, this is what I did. But when I saw someone else and their son committed suicide and they had to stay rolled up, curled up in a ball in bed for days, weeks, or months, I'm not going to judge them." So, one of the themes of Judaism comes probably from Sylvia Bornstein and from Pema Chodron, if you know that name, is try to lean into it. By the way, the
Yeah.
first person who said that in all the podcasts I've done was Rabbi Sohn. She used that phrase. You're going to try to lean into it. So, meaning don't run away, don't suppress, don't ignore, but just be there for that feeling. And that's what I try to do. But I also know that I'm not in Michael's situation.
Right.
So
Right.
I can't. So if it's something a little bit, oh, you broke up with your boyfriend. Okay. I'm happy to talk to that person about, so
Leaning in.
it's a little better if we could just kind of feel where we are, blah, blah, blah. And that's true. And I
Yeah.
believe that and I practice that
Yeah.
myself. But I also know in these extreme cases of unfortunate, horrible death, that I'm very hesitant to say something like that to someone.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is something Rabbi Harold Kushner used to say that, and of course, he's known as a great theologian,
Are
but
you
he
are
would
you
say,
reading my notes, by the way?
no,
Do you have a copy of my notes here? When a person is in the midst of suffering, that is not a time to do theology.
exactly.
Just work with compassion that you can accept and let grief play out as it needs to be. Yeah, Rabbi
Right.
Howard Kushner. Now, wasn't he your predecessor?
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Okay. I should have read that slower. Sorry. And I shouldn't have interrupted. Bad, bad podcaster. Sorry, go
That's
ahead.
okay. Say it again, Morty. You've got the quote.
So when a person is, Rabbi Harold Kushner, when a person is in the midst of suffering, that is not a time to do theology. Just work with compassion that you can accept and let grief play out as it needs to. So yeah, it's got nothing to do with Judaism or Buddhism or anything. That's, to me, that's humanity speaking. That's not, well, from a Buddhist perspective, here's how we look at the situation, Michael, or whatever. That's just a time, I think, just to be there and listen.
Yeah, and being there, that's the point. In other words, I can't tell the person who just went through that crisis to lean into it, but I can lean into my compassion. That's what I can do. And in some way, I have some kind of a faith that that's going to help that person. I may not see it in that moment. I may not know how, but that's the best that you and I can do. We can lean into our compassion and not avoid the pain that we're feeling for this person's loss.
Yeah, I'm looking, I agree. And unfortunately, I'm always looking for something better because that doesn't seem to, and maybe that's all we can do is just feel compassionate, listen, and just be there for them. And like you said, lean into our own feelings. I can't lean into his. I know what I feel, and they will hopefully feel that sense of love or support or compassion, and that's it. Now, when it's not a time of crisis, I'm happy to talk to people about, hey, here's the Jewish way, how we can feel. Here's the Buddhist way, and let them feel
Right.
what's best for them. Sure, but when the building in Surfside, Florida falls, and hundreds of people are, like Rabbi Kushner says, it's not a time for theology. Um, yeah. So, anyways, a couple of other thoughts here. So, yeah, Pema Chodron, who's a wonderful Tibetan Buddhist abbess from Nova Scotia, wrote a book titled "When Things Fall Apart," and she kind of talks about that things happen we don't like. We prefer things we don't like, that they don't have, but we do our best to train ourselves to be present to life, stay in the moment, which gets back to your mindfulness. Don't avoid, don't suppress or ignore when our lives get shaken up, but live with it as best as we can and experience it. And now I'm starting to recall when I teach classes on stress, anxiety, things like that from a Buddhist perspective, although I don't focus on Buddhism, but it is maybe from a humanity perspective. I tell people, hey, when you practice this stuff, start on the small stuff.
Yeah.
I stubbed my toe, or my wife forgot to get the cream cheese, and I'm angry, or whatever. That's the best place to practice. Don't start on the big stuff. It's too overwhelming.
Of course it is. And yet, just being able to lean into your own pain over somebody else's loss, it is so big and it magnifies in so many ways. I remember years ago, I was with a woman at her home at a Shiva call after the death of her husband, and she was very wistful and sad about a former friend who wasn't there, who didn't, you know, couldn't. And but came to know that that former friend had lost her own husband years before, way too young. And I knew her to be a very generous, very loving person. But this was a place she couldn't go. This was a place she couldn't go. And as a result, it was now jeopardizing her friendship with somebody else who was feeling bereft and alone because of the actions of this other person. When we're able to lean into our own pain with compassion, because it's the only way we can do is with compassion for ourselves, the effects on the other person are there. They're huge, and they ripple.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I like to stay on this staying in the present moment, so to speak, concept, absorbing what's going on, feel the fear, just to kind of or lean into it, and over time, not that the goal is for it to go away. There's that word again. But over time,
Right.
it does tend to dissipate when you just kind of be with it, because fear is about the future. Or as my teacher says, Lama Lanang, he says, the past is history, the future is mystery, the present moment is a gift. And I remember when I heard that the first time, and I've now heard it 10,000 times, and I've repeated it 50,000 times. Um, I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. The present moment is a gift. The present moment is a gift. And now that I've had a real chance to practice it over the years, it's a gift not just because, oh, I'm in the present moment, and therefore, if I'm in the present moment, I can't be thinking about the future. Well, that's good. Not just because I'm in the present moment, therefore the fear dissipates because it's an illusion. Well, that's good. But I mean, there are all these good things about it. But just being in the present moment, that's really life. You know, all this other stuff that we add on, past and the future, because we're humans. That's you know, when it's brought into the picture in our minds, you know, over and over and over again, that's doing us harm. So the present moment is a gift. Anyways, there's a story, I don't know if you've heard it. There's a Buddhist story about that where it's called the mustard story. Do you know about this one?
No, what's the
Okay,
mustard
the mustard
story?
story. Uh, the wife of a wealthy man loses her only child. Her name is Kisa Gotami. She becomes desperate. She goes to the Buddha and she says, hey, can you bring my child back? And he goes to her, well, if you can find a white mustard seed from a family where no one has died, then bring it back to me and I'll see what I can do. Um, and so she desperately goes from house to house to house. And but to her disappointment, she could not find a house that had not suffered the death of a family member. And finally, of course, the realization struck that there is no house free from mortality. And she returned to the Buddha, who comforted her and preached to her the truth. Everything is impermanent, compassion, cycle of, etc. And that's great. And I love the story. As I'm reading it from my notes, here's what's not said in the story, which is that when you go from house to house and you ask for a mustard seed, did someone die here? Can you imagine? I mean, you guys do it all the time, going to people sitting Shiva, going to the hospital, et cetera, et cetera. You do it all the time. But just from a humanity perspective, to have to go from house to house and talk to people who've had someone who has died, meaning at that point, I think this woman, okay, I'm not saying she felt comforted, but she, it's like, I don't even want to say it was acceptable, but somehow that, I guess, eased her burden, I'm assuming.
Well, maybe because what happens is you learn that you come to the realization that my pain isn't just my pain, it's pain. This is pain. And every human being shares that. And being able to, I mean, this is one of the great fruits of practice, to be able to understand that it's not mine. And one of the saving graces is when I know it's not mine, I also know it's not mine to stay. It's mine. It's pain that I'm experiencing in this moment. But all things pass through us. And I don't own this pain. It doesn't own me. And I can have compassion for myself for my pain right now. But I can also know, even at a Shiva home, it always, I see it again and again. People who are caught in the depths of despair one moment are laughing with a friend the next. And it's not because the pain has suddenly disappeared and they no longer mourn the person who they just lost, but it's not my pain. It's pain which passes through me. It'll come, it'll go, it'll come, it'll go. And maybe the woman in the mustard story, see, that's what she realized. You know, that's pain. I recognize that. That's pain. I recognize that because it's the same pain. And it hits all of us at different times. It's passing through always in and out. And it's caught my life right now.
Yeah, there's so I mean, so right. You're bringing out all these things that's not specifically said in the story. One is, yeah, it's not just my pain, your pain. Hey, we're all in it together. We're all human. We're all brothers and sisters. Whether because when someone dies, you're Jewish, you're Hindu, you're Buddhist. So guess what? We feel that pain. Then this concept of impermanence, things come, they go. I spoke with someone from this house to get a mustard seed. They lost someone 2 years ago, but now they seem to be doing okay. So you're seeing this cycle, you're seeing this cycle going on, and this sense of impermanence. Um, and this connectivity as well. I feel a strong connection with someone else. So there's a lot going on in that story, much more than I realized. I don't think Rashi wrote any commentary on that story.
Not on that one.
I'm gonna have to check on that. Okay, so on a happier topic, how did you find Israeli folk dancing? And what is it
Ah,
about that kind of dancing that seems to, you've been with it since I knew you back in '79?
and even before. Yeah, I started Israeli dancing as a camper. I went to Sedgwick camps. They had a leadership training camp. Sedgwick, by the way, is not an Indian word. It stands for Central Jewish Institute.
I didn't know
It was
that.
it was the first educational Jewish camp in America, and they had the best Israeli folk dance program of any of the Jewish camps. Many of us who learned there ended up being folk dance teachers in other camps.
Huh.
And what I loved about it was, first of all, I loved the visceral connection, the visceral feeling of movement that connected me to Jewish tradition. Here it was, this was Israeli dancing. So I wasn't connected through prayer, which is also a very physical, visceral thing. That wasn't part of my repertoire. But Israeli folk dancing, I think, became my first spiritual practice. And I stuck with it I still stick with it even though my knees kill me. We still have an Israeli folk dance group that for 30 years has been meeting once a week in my synagogue. And for me, I used to really, I was like sugar over this about how important I thought Israeli folk dance programs were for summer camps. I thought here we're giving kids a tool that when they go off to a college campus and they want to connect in some Jewish way, and it's not going to be for many of them Shabbat services, it might be this practice, although I didn't call it a practice at the time, but that's what it is. It's a physical, spiritual practice that connects you. And what I loved about it was that well, the older Israeli folk dances are done in a circle. Of course, half the newer ones are all line dances. But what I loved about circle dances is that in a circle, holding hands, you gained a certain momentum as you moved, and you can move much faster and more gracefully than you ever could alone. So I love that it was like physically connecting you to other people. And so, yeah, everything about it. I love the movement. I love the music. Um, it was I felt and I was somebody who was never good in any sport. And then when I discovered this, I discovered something my body was good at, and that made me feel graceful. So I'm really grateful to that practice. Thank you for bringing it up after all this time. It's a great practice.
I love it. And and I'll be honest, I think I mentioned this when we spoke a week or two ago. I'm
Yeah.
jealous. It's not the right word, but I feel like, oh, I missed the boat on that. I missed the boat on a lot of things. We won't get into that, but just from a misunderstanding, miscommunication as a child growing up. But that's just a beautiful tool. I don't want to use the word tool. Tool undervalues it, but it's just a beautiful practice. It's a beautiful Jewish practice, and I'm thrilled that you guys are doing it. Like I read about it, like weekly Thursday nights, something like that, because I hope that it gets you know passed down to generations, not just from the Israelis are coming over, they're going to be here, we're going to do this. Like, okay, it's a once or twice a year thing, or the Israelis at camp, but more just as a part of the practice, because you can connect with something higher than yourself in that practice. So for lots of the reasons you mentioned. So I'm glad we got a chance to talk about that. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, the other thing about it that I remember how hard it was at the beginning to teach Israeli folk dancing to boys at camp, because we live in a society in which, especially 40 years ago, boys didn't dance. The only thing we as a culture knew about dance was Dance in America on PBS, very fancy, very hard to do. And so my goal was to break this down and make it look as simple as possible. And so when I would teach, I would purposely teach less gracefully than I dance to make the steps look really simple. That it wasn't about me showing you what a great dancer I am.
Right.
It's about making these steps, making this practice as accessible to everyone. And I would try to pick dances that felt athletic to get the guys feeling like, yeah, this is a challenge.
Yeah. Well, no, that's wonderful and that's brilliant. Where I thought you were going to go with that was that, I didn't find it, I guess for lack of a better word, masculine, cool.
Absolutely. There was
That's the
always
problem.
overcoming the cool factor.
That's the
That
problem.
too.
And that came from my upbringing where, and I'm not going to get into it, but you already know Orthodox yeshiva and all this other stuff. But that's the problem is we have to make this stuff fun. That's not even the right word. We have to get people to want to do it.
Right.
And if we can't, then it's really an uphill battle. And I don't know
See,
who
but summer camps create this artificial environment. You get a chance to shape this world, which is very different than people's outside world. And so if you create in an intentional environment in which something as funky as Israeli folk dancing has a really prominent role, like everybody does this at camp,
Yeah.
then kids have no choice but to get drawn into it because you've created this environment where it plays a central role in the culture. If you choose in a camp to create that culture, which is what I always try to promote.
I'm thinking, just brainstorming here for the next director of Jewish day camps, of Jewish camps, is first of all, you got to break up the cliques. Because if with your buddies, it's not going to happen. That's number one. Number two is you have to make it seem like, look, this is only for the best of you. Not everyone, we're not going to let everyone do this right now. Okay. So it's really just the best. And, you want to make them want to do it. And I'm sure there's other ways
Well,
we
we
can.
would offer it as sport, as a mandatory sport, Perek. So like you had to do it, but it was part of sport. So it's like this is a sport, and you're gonna master the sport because you can.
Yeah, it's a tough one, but it's so much value there. And like I said, if I had to do life all over again, from a Buddhist perspective, I'll get that opportunity. I'm in. I hope I'm smart enough, wise enough to say, "Oh, Israeli folk dancing? Where? How can I,
In the
Anyways,
next Gilgul, you'll be in.
right, exactly. So, last question: Who inspires you, or who are your heroes, live or dead?
I guess I look to living heroes. Some of the people who inspire me are my teachers at the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, who are just filled with so much love and so much compassion, love and compassion for people and for the Jewish tradition, and for all spiritual traditions. I just really, I feel like energized by being in their presence. So those are some of the people who really, and then some of the other people who really I look up to are a couple of colleagues of mine, um, both of them actually women rabbis in my community who are very involved in Truah and also in Jewish spirituality, not surprisingly, who are really my social justice heroes. Like in my next version around in the next in this world, I want to be more like them and not having to be pushed so hard to get involved. I want to be in the center of the social justice activity. They are my role models in that, and I've learned so much from them. So those are some of the people who really inspire me. And then some of the other people who inspire me are my children. Um, I have I love them all and I'm inspired by them all, but I'm thinking in particular of the two who live in Israel because they are so incredibly idealistic and their lives would be so much easier if they didn't make those choices, but they made those choices with so much love and idealism and the desire to change the world, and they're the two of the most idealistic connecting people I know, and they're the ones who ended up in Israel. Go no. So yeah, those are some of the people in my life who really inspire me and make me want to be better.
Well, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, so they didn't just wake up one day and go, "Hey, this is how I'm going to be." They obviously, got it from their parents. Um, yeah. So, anyways, thank you very much for spending some time with us and with me, and for inspiring me. And I know that this will inspire other folks that watch it. So, and it's not your retirement, because I know you're already starting a new chapter. So it's not game over yet. You're just like, okay, next,
Not
next.
game over, but it's just watching it unfold and really not knowing where it's gonna be.
Yeah,
But that's great.
good for you. Good for you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Morty. It's been a pleasure talking with
Good
you
seeing
today.
you again. Okay, be well.
Terrific.
Stay safe.
You take care. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye bye. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Rabbi Daniel Liben. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the It's Not What You Think podcast. That really helps us continue to produce these episodes and invite other guests from around the world. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, or would like to hear any specific guests on the podcast, please share my email, mortylevine@gmail.com, or visit mortylevine.com. Remember, it's not what you think.